Hi, this is the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Neil Geddes-War, and Andrew Chaplin. Andy, are you there?
I am, Neil. Yeah, it's a very hot day and sweltering over the microphone, but yeah, I am indeed here.
Don't sweat too much. We normally have to sweat during our recordings because that's where we hear scary stuff from guests and things like that. So we're recording this in July, but the show is actually going out in August, just for because we're going to talk about things that are kind of pertinent to the world of today in July. So first of all, there's been Boris Johnson. We have learned. Andy, you got a name for him, haven't you? A nickname?
Well, it's not my name. Yeah, it's the media seem to be using it. Bojo for Boris Johnson.
Bojo,
and he basically had double the amount of votes that Jeremy Hunt has, which I'm quite pleased about. It's going to be interesting. I think two blonde-haired, floppy-haired buffoons on the world stage is going to be quite funny. But
they can compare hairstyles. I'm sure that'd be the first point of reference.
There's a picture I came across of Boris Johnson and Trump, both with blonde hair flapping in the wind. So we'll see. I'm hoping he can deliver Brexit because we need to get out of the EU. That's my personal opinion. I'm sure it is yours, Neil. Hopefully, most people listen to this. Of course, we welcome people of all political persuasions. So if some people want to stay in the EU, that's fine. But my personal belief is we should be out and we should be defining our own borders and defining our own laws and statutes. And we'll see. We've got to Halloween. It's a bizarre date, isn't it, to kind of have Brexit done by Halloween. There's something kind of a bit Peter Cushing about that.
I can imagine trick-or-treaters can come around with a different thing. You know, do you want a treat or a trick?
We're
not really leaving Brexit, you know.
That's going to be an amazing outfit for trick-or-treat. Boris Johnson and Trump Halloween outfit.
That'd be the scariest ones.
Yeah, just come as they are.
Yeah, and also in July, we've just been celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landings. Now,
the fake theatre, yeah.
Well, yeah, Andy and I, for those who don't know, we believe, because we've been talking to quite a few people of recent months, who what would they be called? Apollo deniers or Apollo's conspiracy theorists? What's the technical word for them?
Truth seekers.
Truth seekers. Now that's interesting.
When you use the word things like conspiracy theorist, you're actually using a CIA word. So it's created by the CIA as a slogan for anyone who kind of questioned the JFK assassination that government may be involved. So they introduced conspiracy theorists in inverted commas as a negative way to portray people who are legitimately asking legitimate questions and painting them out to be complete nutters. And we're doing, Neil, on our show with our guests is just questioning. We're not saying man definitely didn't land on the moon. We're saying, okay, if this is what we're being presented with, let's have a look at the evidence and let's see if it holds out. And I don't know about you, but whenever I see from now on, whenever I see this tiny little lunar lander, which is essentially a few curtain rods with some tinfoil wrapped around it, and we're supposed to believe that spent days in space flying to the moon, landed perfectly on the moon 7 times. I mean, it probably wasn't the same lunar lander. They probably changed it a bit, but essentially the same design 7 times on the moon with no complications. Well, apart from Apollo 13, which didn't actually land at all. But, we're told 7 successful ones. And you just look at it and you just think that tiny thing flew to the moon and back with no problem.
Yeah, well, I've just been watching a thing made in 1966 about the Apollo lander being built, actually. And it's an official NASA film. It's like behind the scenes of, I think it's Grumman that made the Apollo lander. And they're showing all the electronics and guidance systems of the back of the Apollo lander, all high-tech stuff for the time, at least. And they put this kind of like protective cladding over it. Now, when they got footage of the Apollo ascent vehicle, which is basically the top of the lunar module, taken off from the moon, the thrust of the rocket or whatever it is that causes it to take off causes this padding to literally fly upwards and offwards, which means that all that high-tech sensitive equipment is exposed to the blast. And then you see it in orbit and it's all crumpled up and looks very dodgy. And that's essentially someone coming up and kicking your Apple Mac to pieces, really, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. It's sort of something I came across interesting, Neil. I don't know if you're aware of Daryl Anker and Bashar.
Yes, yes.
I quite like Darryl Anka. I think he's a decent guy, and I think Bashar's information is pretty good. But somebody asked him. I was in a Darryl Anka and Bashar chat room. Somebody asked him about the moon landings, and Bashar seemed to be of the opinion, perhaps a higher opinion, who knows, that the moon landings did in fact happen. However, the photos and the videos were faked. And interestingly, years ago, I saw a medium, quite a famous one in the UK, for private one-to-one. I won't mention her name because I don't have her permission. And I asked her the same thing because I was like, I didn't really want to speak that much to spirit in terms of, you know, mum and dad and grandparents and all that kind of thing. I wanted to kind of like have the bigger picture of what's going on in the world. And one of the questions I asked was, did we really land on the moon? And her spirit guide basically said yes. And I said, okay. And then I said, were the photos and videos genuine, what we saw? And the spirit guide said no. So then we lead on to okay, so did they land? If they did, did they land with 20th century technology, i.e., you know, a couple of curtain rods and some tin foil? Or is there, and this is where we go into things like the Basis Project, a secret space program? Is there a kind of an Elysium group of humans completely detached from the rest of the human race who have far greater technology than we're aware of? Maybe they're the ones landing on the moon and not you know, us in this reality. I don't know.
Interesting. I don't know about this when they say yes, we went, but we faked the photographs. Well, I think, well, why couldn't they take real photographs? You know.
Oh, this is where Marcus Allen would come in and say, well, of course, the film footage would not survive. The radiation would fog it and destroy it. And maybe, you know, that was the case. Maybe it was the case that they knew that it was going to be destroyed, or they were concerned. I mean, the thing is, it was live. So they were concerned that the whole world would essentially see 3 astronauts burning up in flames or crashing on the moon, and that's it. I think recently a speech came out from Nixon of what he would have said if the mission went.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, there's also another interesting thing that happened in the month of July, and it's nothing to do with Apollo, but it's still to do with space, possibly, because that's to do with our next guest, who saw his first ever UFO sighting in July 1964. So a few years before the official Apollo moon landing, but still in the month of July. So I'd like to welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, Ananda Sirisena. Are you there, Ananda?
Hello, I am, yes.
Hello. How are you tonight?
I'm very well, actually. Thank you very much for asking.
Good. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure, and I think we have a few subjects to discuss over the
next
few minutes.
Just very briefly, Ananda, what's your take on the moon landings? Did you think we went? Do you think we didn't go? Do you think a secret space program went? What's your
I think we did go.
You think we did?
And I have access to photographs from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, and I have seen photos of the landers, several landers, as you know, because the Americans did send 6 lots of astronauts, and we can clearly see the pictures and the trails left in the moon dust by the walks. Yes.
I think, Ananda, it'd be great to have you as a guest during a moon landings debate. What do you think, Neil?
Oh, well, the Apollo detectives.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to have like a different side, because with these talks, Ananda, we have Apollo detectives. We have people who basically don't think we went. So it'd be interesting to have somebody who thinks that we did go, and then to have some arguments about why we did go.
Well, and of course, there's the other side to it. That's something Andy mentioned, was the actual photos and film. I wouldn't call them fake so much as they presented something else to us, and people are still trying to figure out why. It's not as simple as fogging of film. It's not as simple as that, because they were using special film. They knew.
Apparently they weren't. According to Marcus Allen, they weren't.
Oh, okay. Well, as far as I know,
it's a bit something that Marcus would obviously be able to much better explain.
Okay. Well, supposing there had been UFOs on the moon when Apollo 11 landed, and they were in the photographs, obviously that would have been a bone of contention because of the cover-up that's still in place.
Yeah.
Until, well, the 17th of December 2017. Just a couple of years ago, the Pentagon finally admitted that unidentified aerial vehicles do exist. When they released the film taken aboard the USS Nimitz and the fighters, the F-18 fighters who filmed an object and described it as a tic-tac, a 40-foot tic-tac. So until December 2017, the United States Air Force, in fact, the entire US military, has always denied the existence of UFOs. But, and this is very interesting, they always said it's not a threat to national security. And the British Ministry of Defense have also been saying a similar thing. This I find very interesting, or why they have to put that sentence in, that it's not a threat to national security. Because if we think about any unidentified aerial object, potentially could be a threat to aircraft carriers, to civil airplanes, military jets, and so on and so forth, as well as the population of all the cities and the villages and the towns on Earth. Because statistically speaking, there is life out there. There's no doubt about it. This galaxy is so huge as to be mind-bogglingly huge. We can't conceive the size of our galaxy. In fact, most of us can't conceive of the size of our solar system, to be honest about it. If you were to draw a line from the sun to the furthest planet, Pluto, and note I still call it a planet, and then if you were to inscribe the sphere around that radius, you have such a massive volume of space. It's unimaginable. You can get hundreds of stars into that sphere. I don't know if you're aware of that. But the sheer size of the solar system is mind-boggling, never mind the sheer size of the galaxy. So on a statistical basis, there is life out there. Now, if that is the case, we have to consider how old is the galaxy, how old is the universe. When you bring time into consideration, statistically speaking, there are many millions of advanced races out there who are not just 100 years or 1,000 years ahead of us. There may be 100,000, 500,000, 1 million years ahead of us technologically. And if that's the case, as good old Arthur C. Clarke said, it would be indistinguishable from magic. We wouldn't be able to distinguish their actions from magic, because it's like giving a modern cell phone to somebody who lived 250 years ago.
And of course, we say they. There isn't really a they, because there's so many different types of they. I mean, there'll be different races coming from different parts of the galaxy and universe with different states of technology. There's possibly, species that are below our technology and species that are way millions of years beyond our technology.
But the fascinating thing is this: if they're coming here, then they've obviously got technology that enables them to come here.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And the fact that we haven't been invaded since 1947 suggests to me that they're interested in us at a distance. So they're monitoring us. They're keeping an eye on us, almost like a spiritual elder brother who wants to ensure that we're not going to blow this place up with our nuclear weapons, which are obviously a very grave danger to humanity and have been since 1945. So it makes sense.
Some of them are. However, some I think really are dark, and I think some have satanic agendas to destroy humanity.
Well, this, of course, is also part and parcel of the general discussion about the subject. And we have to consider all avenues and all possibilities, and the fact that there's more than 57 varieties of life forms approaching us. And
Heinz in space.
Yeah, that was obviously a tongue-in-cheek statement. 57 varieties. Okay, maybe more.
So how are you aware of the 57? Where's this coming from?
No, that's just a reference to Heinz.
Oh, okay, right.
Heinz in space, yeah. Now, getting back to your beginnings, Ananda,
yes.
It was back in July of 1964 that you were not a believer in any of this, were you?
I had not paid much attention to the subject. I suppose I could be described as being neutral. I'd read stories in the papers and heard a few reports on the radio. But in July 1964, I was a schoolboy. On my way to school, on the 8th of July 1964, at about 10 minutes to 9, I was in the company of two school friends, and we were walking down the road. It was about a 10-minute walk to get to school, and we were having a double debate. I was having one debate with one of my friends about a famous boxer who just changed his name to Muhammad Ali. And I was of the opinion this guy could really box. He was a good boxer. And the two friends were brothers.
What was his name previously?
Cassius Clay, Cassius Marcellus Clay.
Wow.
And he changed his name. He said, I don't want no slave name. So he changed it to a name fitting in with his religion, which was Islam at the time. And he took the name Muhammad Ali. So Muhammad, by the way, is probably one of the most popular names in the world. And so I'm having this debate with the elder of my friends, saying, and the younger one is having another debate with me about pop groups. And we're discussing the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones. So this double debate is going on when suddenly my head was tilted up, almost by what I call a mental hook. It's as though my head was poised upwards suddenly, and there were 3 discs in the sky. So I stopped walking. Presume my mouth was now open in wonderment and amazement. My 2 friends stopped as well, and the youngest of them said immediately, flying saucers. So I turned around to him and I said, I don't think flying saucers exist. And then in the next 60 seconds, because we observed them for at least 60 seconds, maybe 55 seconds, I changed my mind completely. Here was an undeniable experience of 3 flying discs, apparently metallic, seen at about 10 minutes to 9 on a sunny morning. 3 teenage schoolboys without a care in the world, I suppose, at that time. And suddenly we see these 3 discs, and they're flying in formation, forming a perfect triangle. And I start a process of elimination. I want to explain these objects away. Clearly not the sun. The sun is shining on the objects from the other side of the sky. Clearly not the moon. Clearly not weather balloons. And I said, hey, I can test the weather balloon one because I can see in which direction the clouds are moving. And these objects were moving against the motion of the clouds. So there were some white fluffy clouds, what you would call cumulus clouds in the sky that morning. And we observed that these 3 objects are moving towards a particular bank of clouds. And then they went in there and never came out. And we were so stunned, we stood there waiting another 5 minutes, all 3 of us saying, we need to see these objects come out through the cloud. And they didn't. So it's almost as though the cloud swallowed up the 3 objects. Now, the 3 objects were clearly discs, disc-shaped objects. At the time, I was in the 6th form studying mathematics and physics. So I went to school that morning, and I mentioned it to a few of my school classmates. Of course, one of them was very, very critical. He said to me immediately, he burst out, don't be silly, flying saucers don't exist. Now notice his statement was very different from the one I had made to my younger friend. I had said, I don't think flying saucers exist. I didn't say they don't exist. I said, I didn't think they existed. But then I changed my mind. And I believe it was Mahatma Gandhi who said that someone who doesn't change his mind in the light of greater reason is a fool. And I changed my mind. That day to today, I know flying discs exist. So later that morning, I mentioned it to another friend of mine, David, in the class, and he was rather more curious. He said, well, what did you see? Sketch it for me. Did these objects make any noise? How high were they in the sky? So I said, well, they moved into the bank of clouds. So they were at the same altitude as the cumulus clouds, which generally form between 1,000 and 2,000 feet. So based on that and the angle that they subtended, we were able to do a quick calculation, back of envelope sort of thing. And we estimated that each disc was 75 feet in diameter. Now, we had no technology in those days, no circular objects of that size that could fly in the sky so slowly. And that's the point I want to make. These objects were moving slower than any civil aircraft fly, because this happened in Wimbledon, southwest London, famous for tennis, as you know. And there were not 3 tennis balls. Let me point that out. I was familiar with aircraft flying in and out of Heathrow Airport, and we definitely knew these were not aircraft. And David asked me a very pertinent question. He said, "Did they make any sound?" And I said, "No, they didn't. They were totally silent." And the 3 discs maintained that formation till they entered the bank of clouds. Now, who knows? Maybe there was a mothership inside that cloud, and these 3 flying saucers, and I'll use the term flying saucers because I think it's quite an enchanting term, actually. I think these 3 flying saucers moved into a mothership that was in that cloud, which looked like the other stratocumulus clouds that were around. So that's from that day I've been interested in the subject, and I really wanted to know what these objects were, where they came from, why are they here. It's obvious that they were an advanced propulsion system, which meant there was intelligence behind it, and I wanted to know what the intelligence wanted here on Earth. So these were very important questions for me.
Did you and your friends on that day, well, I mean, it must have been quite an exciting moment, but did you feel any fear that maybe you might have been threatened in some way?
No, not at all. Quite the contrary. I felt a holy presence while I was standing underneath these 3 objects. And when I wrote my report up, and I sent it to a research organization in America a few years ago, one of the leading researchers said, "Oh, why did you have to mention that?" I said, because this is a true report. I'm putting down what I felt at the time. I felt a holy presence, and I have to put that down. It wouldn't be fair of me not to say that, because that's what I felt. None of us felt fear. We felt amazement, wonderment. My youngest friend had said flying saucers. I tried to suggest to him they don't exist. In the next 60 seconds, I changed my mind. And the 3 of us did discuss this from time to time. And we were utterly convinced that we had a most unusual experience, later to be called a close encounter. Presumably 500 feet is the distance that Professor Hynek suggested as defining a close encounter. I think these objects were a little bit further away, but large enough to be clearly seen with the naked eye. And at that time, I had very good eyesight. So we there was another embarrassing thing I have to mention here. I had just been made a sub-prefect in the school, and it was my job to jot down the names of pupils who came in late. Well, because we hung around waiting for these objects to come out of the bank of clouds, we were late to school that morning. So I'm usually a very punctual person, and this was the first time that I'd been late to school. So I went straight to my classroom, and I avoided the little service that they held in those days. I'm talking 1964. The headmaster would always give a pep talk first thing in the morning in the hall, and everyone was supposed to be present. and, tell us to behave ourselves and so on and so forth. Well, I skipped that through sheer embarrassment and went into the classroom. And that's where I met the other guy, the first guy, Martin, to whom I blurted out, "We've just seen 3 flying saucers." And he said to me, "Don't be silly, flying saucers don't exist." That, of course, threw me back a bit. And then later in the morning, I mentioned the sighting to David, and David was very, very curious. So we drew a sketch, did the calculation, and he said, "Well, that's very strange. Whatever it was, we can't explain it, can we?"
Wow.
So these discs, they were, did you say they were all silver in color?
They were obviously of some kind of metallic alloy, or I don't know. They could have been aluminium. I don't know, but they had a kind of there was a light apart from the sun glinting off the surface.
Right.
They seem to have their own light.
Yeah.
I'm seeing these three objects from underneath. Now, we've got a really good artist rendering of this in my book. And when I got the artist, this guy called Frank Warren, I described the sighting to him, and he made me a composite image of this. I nearly fell off my chair because the drawing he made was almost exactly like what we had seen. And so I thought I'll include his drawing in my book, where I describe my sighting and essentially this story I've just told you. It's a true story.
Remind us the title of the book and where.
The book is called Massive Vimana Over the Atomic Weapons Establishment. A Challenge for Parliament is the subtitle. We'll come to that later, now that we have a new Prime Minister who promises to get us a complete Brexit. Then maybe their next challenge will be the subject of unidentified flying objects. Let's wait and see.
Yeah, well, I remain sceptical of the new Prime Minister, but I've been sceptical of all of them, to be honest.
It's going to be funny, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
If anything else, it will be a clown show.
Yeah.
We have to give them time, don't we? We have to give all
course.
these leaders time.
Yeah.
And as long as leaders don't lead us into war, then I can say at least they're doing some good.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure our alien friends will be keeping a close eye on the Iran situation.
Well, they've been keeping a close eye on all military establishments, all intercontinental ballistic missiles, all atomic weapons testing establishments, even uranium mines are being monitored. They monitor our military bases, as you have heard, I'm sure, many times from the reports that the Ministry of Defense has released. So we're being monitored very, very carefully. It's such as you might monitor children in a school playground.
Who's that personnel who said, "Oh my God, the kids have got the matches"?
Oh, Jim Mars.
Jim Mars, yeah.
Yeah, that's an old saying as well. I'm not sure where Jim Mars got it from.
It's very apt saying.
He might have got it from the Atherius Society.
Now, you're a member of the Atherius Society, so
yes,
presumably when you had your experience in 1964, it must have it was a pivotal moment for you because it changed you. And so tell us how you got involved with the Atherius Society and how you heard of them.
Okay, well, so July 64, I see these objects. So now I head to the library, Wimbledon Library, the local library. I need to find out more. I'm still at school. So I go to the library and look for books on the subject. And I found one book called The Sky People. This was written by Brinsley Lapoer Trench. At the time, I didn't know that Brinsley Lapoer Trench was the Earl of Clancarty, Lord Clancarty, who sat in the House of Lords. So I read the book, Sky People. I thought, well, that's interesting. Then I started reading other books. I soon found Major Donald Kehoe, started reading his books. And then in 1966, I was an undergraduate student at Imperial College, studying engineering. And another very strange thing happened. I mean, this is almost unbelievable, but it's true. And I'll tell you what happened there. one Friday afternoon, I'm about to go into a lecture theatre for the afternoon lecture theatre on, I think it was thermodynamics or fluid mechanics or something like that. And I saw somebody sat on the bench reading a book. I suddenly stopped and I said to myself, I have to read that book. So I walked up to this stranger and I said to him, I must read that book. So he smiled at me and said, well, I'm reading it at the moment. Why don't you come and see me on Monday? Now, this was a guy, a total stranger to myself. So I asked his name and he said, Robert. So I said, okay, well, I'll come and see you on Monday. So I went to see him on Monday and he handed me the book. Now, I didn't know who the author was. I didn't know what the subject matter was. I didn't know what the title of the book was. All I knew was I had to read that book. So he handed me this book, and it was a book called The 9 Freedoms, written by Dr. George King, who founded the Atherius Society in London in 1955. So this is 1966, 11 years later. So when I read the book, I was absolutely astounded. I hadn't been aware that there were people claiming contact with flying saucers. And that's exactly what Dr. George King was doing in this book here. So I read the book, returned it to Robert, and he said, well, are you interested in investigating this man further? And I said, definitely. After my sighting of the 8th of July 1964 and the reading of the book in this very strange manner, I want to know more about Dr. George King. He said, well, there's a little group that meets on a Thursday afternoon at Imperial College. You're welcome to come and join us. So I went to the first one and they played a tape-recorded lecture given by Dr. George King. And the second week, they played another tape-recorded lecture. And I was absolutely stunned by the knowledge and the information that Dr. George King was giving in these tape lectures. And then I resolved to myself, I need to meet this man. I must find out more about him and the Atherius Society and these great lectures he's given, which are being played on tape at these Thursday afternoon meetings at Imperial College. As you probably know, Imperial College is part of the University of London. And I was doing my engineering course there.
Well, how did they take his kind of information? Because I would have thought they'd be quite negative towards it.
Well, there obviously the students who were coming to the meetings were interested one way or the other, like myself. Those who might have been skeptical probably remained skeptical. But let me tell you the names of the 2 lectures that I heard. The first one was called The 7 Dimensions. And the second tape recording was called The 4 Aspects of Creation. Now, I was absolutely amazed at the knowledge that Dr. George King was disseminating in these lectures, which is why I resolved to find out more. So I went along to the Atherius Society in Fulham Road, London, 757 Fulham Road, London, and wanted to find out more. And I said, I want to meet this contactee. Well, a contactee is someone who claims contact with flying saucers. I said to them, I want to meet Dr. George King. And they said, well, that's going to be a bit difficult. He's in California at the moment. This is 1966. So then they said he'd probably come to England next year, 67. So I waited and waited. No sign of Dr. King. In 1968, I'm waiting. And they said, oh, it's unlikely. He's so busy in California. He's got so much to do. He's unlikely he'll come over this year. So I said, right, I'm going to go and see him. So I joined the British University's North America Club. And in those days, they used to charter planes for students to go to America and have a little bit of an adventure. So I went over and flew to, and then eventually flew to New York and then flew to Los Angeles and went over to the headquarters of the Atherius Society in North Hollywood. And I was fortunate enough to be able to meet Dr. George King and was able to ask him many questions about his claims of contact. So that's my introduction to the whole subject matter.
Now, he wasn't American. He was actually English, wasn't he?
Yes, he was born in Shropshire, in England, in Wellington, in Shropshire. Definitely an Englishman. And if you listen to any of his tape-recorded lectures, I've mentioned 2 of them there, you'll definitely understand he was English, very British, very English indeed, yes.
So he was kind of doing his Atherius stuff, presumably around the same time as George Adamski, who was in America at the time, I believe.
I think Adamski's claims preceded his claims by a few years. Yes.
And were they similar claims, or was there a great difference between the two kind of ideas?
Okay, this would take me months to answer because I have studied both men. Because of my interest in the subject matter, obviously I was going to investigate contactees. Adamski claimed a contact in the desert in California in November 1952. And George King started his contacts in May of 1954, which is what led him to found the Atherius Society in 1955. Similar in some respects, different in many other respects. So, is the answer to your question.
Okay, I've got a very scant knowledge of it, but I do have a recollection reading that he somehow heard a voice or something in his room in London.
Yes,
through meditation or something.
That's correct. He what he said was that he was in his apartment one Saturday morning when a voice rang out, a physical voice speaking loudly and clearly, and told him, and this is the exact quote, "Prepare yourself. You are to become the voice of interplanetary parliament." And then he was gone. So he was utterly shocked by this experience. He didn't know what interplanetary parliament was, hadn't heard of such an organization. And he started asking his friends. And then by the way, he was a medium at the time, but he was a yogic medium. He was a ardent practitioner of yoga. And I'm talking about the very serious yoga, not just the hatha yoga, right. The mental yoga that leads you into deep meditation. So he asked his friends, and they said, "We've never heard of anything like interplanetary parliament. Just leave this alone. This doesn't sound good or right. Leave it alone." So 8 days after this event, he decided that he's going to sit down in meditation and wait, ask the question, what was this about? Where did it come from? And who was it? And he said, a great master of yoga from the Himalayas walked through his locked door and sat down in front of him and explained what it was all about. And then he walked out through the locked door and he was gone. So that is the explanation he gave as to how it all began for him and how it resulted in the Atherius Society.
And so the name Atherius, is that to do with the race of beings that contacted him?
No, if you go back to the Greek language, Atherius means one who comes through space.
Right.
So it's obviously based on the word ether. So if you put the letter A in front of the word ether, you have the first part of the name. And of course, the IUS in the Greek language is an indication of a male entity. Mm-hmm. And the female entity would have been Etheria, as opposed to Atherius. So it's based on a Greek word.
Right. And now, I may have got this wrong, but I remember as a kid, there used to be a TV series, a TV show, you may be aware of it, and certainly older listeners from the UK will probably be aware of it, Nationwide on BBC. And I'm sure I remember seeing something of the Atherius Society on there many, many years ago as a kid.
Yes.
Now, I believe they had something called a prayer box or something. Is that right? Am I confusing places? Or
no,
people?
you're quite right. The Atherius Society conducts something called Operation Prayer Power, and they say they can collect prayer energy in a prayer battery, a specially designed prayer battery. So what you probably saw on that program was a facsimile of that box that they use. Yes.
Yeah, I remember, I think they were out on the open on a cliff or something like that, but it was out in the open. I vaguely recall them chanting perhaps, or pointing their hands, touching the box.
They use yoga mantra for chanting.
Yeah.
And they conduct these quite often on a hill in Devon called Holston Down.
Right. Gosh, I'll tell you what, it's all coming back to me now. I mean, I'm surprised myself about how much I know about it.
And well, you've got a good memory.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's where I vaguely heard the name of George King. Now, there wasn't there a controversy that he wasn't really a sir, but he kind of, someone mistaken him for a sir, so he kept that name or something, or was he really a sir in the sense that we understand someone to be knighted as a sir?
He was not dubbed by the Queen, if that's what you mean.
Yeah. So someone had made a mistake, somewhere, a journalist, and called him sir, but he was quite happy to take that on board or something. Is that right?
I think he was dubbed a sir by I'm not sure who, but one of the chivalric orders.
Right. Okay.
And if you're dubbed by a chivalric order as sir, you're entitled to use that title. Yes.
Okay. You don't have to go to the Queen.
No, even though it may not be in Debrets, so means that that meant the Queen didn't dub you personally, but that's another matter altogether.
So he obviously ended up in America, presumably, and was, being presumably seen in North Hollywood by a lot of famous people or well-connected people. Did it grow into a big organization? Obviously, it's still going today, but
it's still going today. I suppose it depends how you define big or large. So I wouldn't give you any idea about that. But all I can say is that he was very busy in California, and I don't know if you know what his primary claim was, that he could go into a yogic trance and receive transmissions from space intelligences, which were then recorded on tape. And he has recorded hundreds of these. And the Atherius Society has an archive of all of these tape recordings. In fact, he demonstrated this on BBC television once in May 1959. Were you aware of that?
Probably not, but they may have alluded to it in the Nationwide program, possibly, but I can't remember that.
Well, if you go to the BBC website and just do a search for an item called "The Man from Mars," you will see George King's name come up, and in there they have a recording of George King in the BBC studio on a program called Lifeline, which was recorded in May 1959, when we only had black and white TV in this country. Yeah.
And so would this be the interplanetary communications, the Parliament people that were trying to come through?
Correct.
And so presumably after they made initial contact with him, they carried on communicating with him.
Yes.
And what was the main kind of theme of their message?
The message of the Atherius Society message is that they come in peace. They're interested in our spiritual welfare. They don't want us to destroy this earth, either through atomic warfare or other nefarious means. And they want to see us grow, prosper, eventually become space travelers, and eventually become invited to join the Interplanetary Confederation and the Intergalactic Confederation. That's where they want us to see. They want to see us evolve into a peaceful spacefaring society.
Did they go into details about who the Dark Ones are and why they're doing what they're doing?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
But that's an entirely different subject, which probably we won't have time to go into today.
Could we go into it a little bit? Because I'm quite interested.
Andy loves the dark stuff.
I want to understand it in order to defeat it.
Well, there is a cartoon sketch called The Dark Side, isn't there? I forget who did those drawings.
Yeah, the name rings a bell, but I can't remember either. But yeah,
yes, I think it was an American cartoonist, isn't it?
Possibly.
I forget the name.
Possibly.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
would
the dark side be the Archons or the Reptilians or another group?
No, they don't give names like that. No, they don't give. They call them the Dark Ones.
Yeah,
we're trying to create a lot of trouble on this earth.
I've noticed.
They're from this earth, but they're in the lower planes of this earth.
Would this be like a species that's within the earth, like this hollow earth type?
No, not within the earth, on different planes of this earth.
Like a dimension?
Lower astral realms type.
Right. The lower astral realms. You hit the phrase right on the key, on the button there.
I'm getting my brownie points tonight, I must admit.
Where have they come from?
There are people who have lived on this earth and have passed on. When we pass on, we move to another realm. Whether we go to a more blissful realm or one of the dark realms depends on our actions. That is based on the simple teaching of the law of karma, which, of course, if you're familiar with the Eastern religions, you will fully understand.
So they're saying that these are essentially human souls?
Yes, correct.
Would you go along with the theory of the reptilians and their existence?
I have seen no evidence for that. I'm a very thorough researcher, and when I research subjects, I make a thorough investigation. It's very easy to make claims. It's much more difficult to uphold those claims. So when I've seen people say, "Oh, this president and that president suddenly turn to reptilians," and you can see it on film. Well, I haven't seen it on film. I've looked carefully, and I haven't seen Bush or Obama suddenly turning to reptilian faces. Their faces have remained Bush and Obama. So for that reason, I take such claims with a pinch of salt. You have to be careful in this field, because there are charlatans, there are deluded people, there are people who are totally ignorant. Unfortunately, there are many mediums who don't know what they're talking about, very sadly. So therefore, you have to be careful. You've got to weed out all the silly stuff from what can stand the test as we go into the future. Which brings me to the point neatly about two items in my book that I mentioned. One is we have discovered a potential ancient alien base on the moon, and we have an incredible mystery on Mars that has not yet been explained by any scientist.
But taking the devil's advocate route, somebody could say that, well, the bases on the moon could be a silly claim. If you were to talk to someone like Brian Cox, he would say exactly that. He
would say that, but then you have to show him the photographs and ask him to explain.
Where would we find the photographs?
You'll find them in my book. They're in the photographs of these objects which appear to have structure and seem to be very ancient, because you can see where meteor strikes have left their mark on these objects. So if you have perchance the opportunity to talk to Brian Cox, please show him the photographs that are in my book. These objects, by the way, were initially photographed by the Apollo 15 astronauts in 1972. And they were discovered recently. We went to the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter photographs, and we found them there in great detail. And I'm talking great, majestic detail. obviously I can't show them to you on a radio show. All I can say is, if you go to Amazon and do a search for massive Vimana, my book will come up, and then you can see a few pages of the book on the Amazon website. They allow you a look inside before you purchase the book.
Yeah. Would this be the same base that Carl Wolf, the American airman who was talked about alien bases on the moon back in 2000, I think it was 2001, the Disclosure Project thing in America?
Yes, I've listened to Carl Wolf carefully. What he described is not what these objects show. So I suspect he was talking about somewhere else on the moon.
Right, so it could be a few bases.
The objects that we are describing, and there was a paper published in the Journal of Space Exploration, believe it or not, about this. These objects are in a crater called Paracelsus C. So there's a crater on the moon called Paracelsus. There's also craters A, B, and C. And these objects are in a crater called Paracelsus C. Paracelsus, as you may recall, was an ancient alchemist. So names on the moon have been given based on, old characters and new characters and so on. So these craters on the other side of the moon, I don't like to call it the dark side of the moon because it's not really dark. It's the side we can't see. On that side of the moon, in the crater called Paracelsus C, are these objects. And if you can't get hold of my book and or don't want to buy my book, do a search on the internet for Paracelsus C, and you'll see the paper come up. The paper I just mentioned, which was published in the Journal of Space Exploration. Right. Have a read through that paper, and you'll see very clear photographs of these objects.
That's interesting, because I do a talk. I'm about to do it actually on in August, and it's called Aliens on the Moon. So my talk basically looks at the various evidence points that people out there have put forward as potential evidence for aliens on the moon. And so I cover Carl Wolf. I cover Ingo Swann, the remote viewer, who claims that he remote viewed the moon and saw humanoid type beings there through his remote viewing. May appear to be doing some sort of mining on the moon. There's been some books written about it by the people that suggest that there seems to be some sort of mining operation on the moon. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I am. Yes, I've read the book called Somebody Else's on Our Moon.
That's the one I'm thinking of.
And you'll find a little reference in that paper in the Journal of Space Exploration about these objects in the crater. The crater, Paracelsus C, looks as though it's been mined, possibly. So that's an interesting point that you just brought up. So can I suggest then when you give your talk, or before you give your talk in August, you get hold of this paper, or I can send you a copy of it.
That'd be great.
And then you can show it to the audience.
That'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, well, that'll be even more convincing evidence. Now, it's interesting that they do put these alien bases, if there are, if we can say they're alien bases on the moon, that they do put them on the opposite side to us, because that's the side that we don't often see. And I mean, that's kind of an intelligent place to put it, because obviously if they want to be there, but they don't want to be seen, and you say it could be ancient, it's been there for however long, I don't know, but a fairly long time. But obviously they didn't want to be seen by Earth observers, which suggests that they're aware that, people on Earth could potentially see evidence of an alien base if they had it on the side facing Earth with telescopes or whatever. Yes. So there's an intelligence behind that idea of putting it on the other side of the moon. But also, as I explain in my talk, that if you're an alien race coming from far distant galaxies, you're not going to keep doing that journey all the time. And it's akin to our military bases, that we might put a military base out in Afghanistan or in the Falkland Islands, whatever, so we don't have to keep going back and forth there. We have a presence there. And it makes perfectly logistical sense that you have a presence on the other side of the moon where you can, you run your spaceships from there to land here and go backwards and forwards or whatever you want to do a reconnaissance of the Earth people. It seems a perfectly logistical reason to stick one there, I think.
Yes, it makes sense. And of course, you'll have the skeptics saying otherwise. But these are people who are skeptical that intelligent races can be coming to this Earth. And if you ask them why, they say, oh, it's the distances are too vast. Now we've got to look at this from a statistical point of view. Because the galaxy is so huge and there's billions of stars in our galaxy, statistically speaking, there must be life forms out there. And therefore, some of them are more advanced than us and some of them are not. The more advanced forms can travel space. And they're not going to go chugging along in using an internal combustion engine, are they? So we have to think outside the box and say, well, they might have developed super technologies that can get them here very, very quickly if they need to. Or indeed, they may originate from higher planes within our solar system itself.
Yeah, which goes into the spiritual side of things and the spiritual frequencies, if you want to call it that. I'm reminded of this guy, I think it was the turn of the 20th century, an American colonel or something at the time. He claimed that there would never be communication between Great Britain and America because no one would be able to build a flag big enough to wave from one landmass to another that would be seen. And it shows the kind of limited thinking of people of the time, and here we have, information going at the speed of light through fiber optics and all sorts of things that guy couldn't possibly have imagined, you see.
Indeed, so I have used a similar analogy in many a talk I've given, because I used to live in East Africa, and there you still have people who use drums for communication.
Yeah.
And I've told people the story about them finding the sea and then drumming a message across the sea and wondering why they didn't get a message back.
Because the other people haven't got drums or they can't hear them.
Drums. They couldn't hear the drums, right?
Yeah.
By the way, these people in Africa who use drums are very, very clever. When they do drumming, they can send 3 messages simultaneously by very clever drumming techniques. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but that's
within a pattern, a drum pattern. The beats and the gaps between the beats are
a very sophisticated messaging system that they had evolved. But obviously to communicate with people who could hear the drums, and then therefore reply. So when we say that we haven't heard from extraterrestrials, we're just talking about Radio SETI. SETI was the search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Yeah.
Now, Radio SETI is doing looking for a needle in a haystack, and they say they haven't received anything of interest other than one wow signal. But we feel in the Society for Planetary SETI Research, SPSR, of which I'm currently the president, that we are looking on our moon and the other planets for evidence of extraterrestrial life, rather than just focusing on a radio search. And I mentioned this mystery on Mars. Well, you know that the head of the SETI Institute is Seth Shostak.
Yep.
You've heard that name before?
Yep.
Well, I showed him these photos of Mars with the mystery. And he said to me, that looks very suspicious. Those were the words he used. Now, let me explain what it is we found on Mars.
I'll tell you what, before we go to Mars, if we can take a break, because it's about an hour we've been going now. So I think it would be a good chance to take a break, and we can head to Mars in a few moments after these messages.
Imagine no longer being tied down to your computer, but having the freedom to take live talk radio with you anywhere you go. TalkStream Live introduces our first ever iPhone application. The talk shows you follow now follow you, and your iPhone is now the fastest and easiest way to stay connected to the best talk radio on the internet. Listen to live talk shows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. TalkStream Live, now available in the iTunes App Store.
And welcome back, Mr. Trump. How did you find the black hole?
Well, I found there's no evidence of Russian collusion there, just an empty void. So instead I listened to Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Well, here we are in part 2 of the Paranormal Peep Show, and if you were listening to part 1, you would have found out that we've been talking about the dark side of the moon, or rather the hidden part of the moon, where there's alien bases, and also the Atherius Society, and UFOs flying behind clouds. And we're talking to Ananda Sirisena, who is a member of the Atherius Society, and he was just about to talk about Mars, but we said, let's take a break. So we've had a break now, and we're going to talk about Mars. And I know you've done a lot of research on Mars over the years. So what have you found out about Mars then?
Right. I'm glad to come back again on the program. Let me begin by saying that I'm currently the president of SPSR, and that acronym stands for Society for Planetary SETI Research. SPSR was founded by Professor Stanley McDaniel many decades ago, and it was Professor McDaniel who wrote a book called the McDaniel Report. And I have a copy of this book in front of me, and I joked with him once because I said to him, the subtitle of your book is possibly the longest subtitle I've ever seen. And he laughed at it. Let me just read the subtitle of the McDaniel Report. It says, on the failure of executive, congressional, and scientific responsibility in investigating possible evidence of artificial structures on the surface of Mars and in setting mission priorities for NASA's Mars Exploration Program. Written by Stanley V. McDaniel, Professor Emeritus and former Chairman of the Department of Philosophy, Sonoma State University.
I can see why it's a long one, yeah. Blimey. But it pulls no punches, I guess.
Doesn't, no. And if you read the book, you'll understand the point he's trying to make is that we have not approached this subject of the possibility of artificial structures on the other planets in a logical, consistent manner. He says there's been a failure in our thinking on when it comes to this subject. But that's a book that's interesting, and again, your listeners can find it, I'm sure, in a library or on Amazon, and it makes for very extremely interesting reading. So SPSR was founded by Professor Stanley McDaniel, a philosopher. Currently, because of my technical background, I was invited to become president of SPSR last year, and I've been president of this very small scientific research organization. I just thought I'll mention that because Professor McDaniel was also responsible for another book, which you may have heard, called The Case for the Face, Scientists Examine the Evidence for Alien Artifacts on Mars. Another very interesting book, and he invited me to write one chapter for that book, which I did. So just worth mentioning that. So SPSR, the Society for Planetary SETI Research, which is essentially an American organization, did in just before the Mars Global Surveyor went back to photograph those objects that had been seen by the Viking orbiters in 1976. We're now talking 20 years later. SPSR, including Professor McDaniel, Dr. Mark Carlotto, Professor Horace Crater, Vincent DiPietro, and several other of these Mars researchers, Dr. John Brandenburg, they went and did a presentation at the NASA headquarters and said, you must go back and rephotograph that region of Mars known as Cydonia, because there's a few interesting things in there that need looking at.
So what was obviously the Viking missions were pretty much what would you call it? I mean, they actually touched down. They were the first ones to touch down on Mars, weren't they?
Each Viking orbiter put down a pod on the surface of Mars, each of which had 3 life experiments. And they landed in 2 different areas of Mars. And they conducted the experiments. While 2 of the experiments gave strange results that were anomalous, one of them, the one called the label release experiment, gave an unmistakable signal of life in the soil of Mars, microbial life, obviously. Or at least we assume it's microbial life. Now, this has remained a highly contentious issue with NASA. NASA wanted to explain those results away as chemical reactions, but up to now, they have not succeeded in explaining those results away as chemical reactions. They simply brush the results under the rug, so to speak. And the scientist who designed the labeled release experiment, a scientist by the name of Dr. Gilbert Levin, to this day insists that the Viking landers found evidence of microbial life in the soil of Mars.
And wasn't of them,
go on, Andy.
There was a few probes that crashed, didn't they? How many have been successful and how many have been just...
The Russians failed. The Russians failed. The Americans succeeded in sending spacecraft to Mars, with one exception. That one went adrift because it appeared that they turned off the navigation system for some strange reason. So we never got photos from that. But the Mars Global Surveyor did rephotograph Mars in 1999, and since then, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter has taken very clear photographs of the region of Cydonia, and I'll give credit to NASA. They did go back and rephotograph that area. So what is this mystery that I'm speaking about on Mars? It's not so much the face on Mars. A face is a subjective impression, but there is an objective discovery on Mars, which was analyzed mathematically by Professor Horace Crater, who was professor of physics at the University of Tennessee Space Institute and who became a member of SPSR. And he did a thorough job in analyzing the placement of 6 mounds. And I call them mounds, but they're actually, on average, a little bit larger than the Great Pyramid at Giza in Egypt. Now, you know that the Great Pyramid at Giza is about 230 meters square. Agreed?
Yeah.
Okay.
As far as we know.
Well, these mounds in Cydonia, and I'll refer to them by the lettering that Professor Crater gave to them when he did his analysis, A, B, D, E, and G. Mound A is 280 by 380 meters, approximately. These are approximate figures because all the 6 mounds are of different shape and size. Mound B is 170 meters by 180 meters. Mound D is 290 by 420 meters, so it's much larger than the Pyramid of Giza. E is 230 by 250, almost the same size as the Pyramid at Giza. And the Mound G is 240 meters by 480 meters in size. These are approximate figures. And what the mystery is the placement of these 6 mounds. They seem to have been placed by intelligence, not by chance, because as you know, the surface of Mars is very cold. It's probably been dry and has had no atmosphere for millions of years. And suddenly we find a formation of mounds that have been placed in with certain mathematical precision. And again, I can't show you the picture because we're on radio. Again, this is a chance for me to plug my book. In my book, I give a drawing of that formation formed by the mounds. And if you're a mathematician at all, you're going to be astounded by this.
Okay.
So can you describe how these mounds are? Are they kind of like in a circle or square?
No, they're not in a circle. They're placed in right triangles, some of which show repeating angles and form parallelograms and right triangles. Now, right triangles have been stated in the past to be indicative of intelligence, because although you can get hexagonal structures in nature, right triangles are very rare. That's not to say that they couldn't form by nature, but when you see this particular pattern of 6 mounds on Mars, you begin to scratch your head because you think, how did that happen? And these mounds are very clear now in the latest photographs taken by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO for short. They gave us the best possible resolution, 10 times better than the Viking photographs. So we're talking of very clear photographs. And the puzzle is not so much what are the mounds made of, how did they form? That's not the puzzle. The puzzle is how did they get placed in such a pattern? Now, you know the 3 pyramids in Giza are laid, but not in a straight line. You're aware
corresponding to the Orion's belt, I think, isn't it?
They correspond approximately to the Orion belt. So there has been a suggestion that perhaps the Egyptians were trying to represent the Orion belt on the surface of Earth. What was somebody trying to represent on the surface of Mars? This is going to be an intriguing question, which we're going to get drawn into more and more as we begin exploration of Mars in a serious manner in the coming decades.
I mean, I remember maybe it was when you did a talk for my group some 20 odd years ago, or maybe I've seen it. I think it was, yeah. That was when I ran Chiltern Pagan Link in Cheshire many, many years ago. I think it was.
And how come I'm still only 21?
But being a member of the Atherius Society, it obviously does something to your cells. So does it line up with Avebury in England, or there's some suggestion there's a connection to it?
There has been a suggestion that there's a connection between some of the objects in Cydonia and some of the objects in our good soil in England. All I can say is that this particular mound formation, formed by the 6 mounds, I have not seen on Earth.
That's interesting. Yeah. And are they kind of connected to the face, or are they nothing to do with I mean, they're in the general area, but
they're in the same area. And interestingly, if you were to draw a line from 2 of the mounds E and A, that line extends to the face, and the face appears to be on that extended line. So maybe there is a connection, maybe there isn't. We don't know. The whole point is many scientists now saying, well, we need to go and land on Mars and
that'll be the aliens.
That's NASA ringing up.
Cut the feed.
Yeah, stop talking about Mars.
Yeah, you did. I muted the microphone just so you didn't get too much of that phone ringing. So there may be some connection to the face, and of the face, of course, as I said, is is a subjective impression. All faces are, in a sense, but we recognize human faces very easily. Otherwise, we'd never recognize our friends walking down the road, would we? So we have a tendency to recognize faces. But the mound configuration is not a subjective analysis. It's an objective analysis, and it was done by a professor of physics, which lends that analysis great weight. And I cannot remember whether in 20 years ago, when I did a presentation for your group, Neil, whether I showed pictures of that configuration or not.
I do vaguely remember seeing some photographs of a configuration of Cydonia area, yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. Well, it hasn't gone away. It's probably millions of years old, and it's not going to go away. It's going to remain a challenge for our space explorers. And a paper about this was also published in the Journal of Space Exploration. And in my book, I give indication as to where you can find it in these journals, exactly where you can find copies of these papers if you wish to read them further. And they're very interesting. They do not need great mathematical knowledge. In other words, you don't need to be a professor of physics or a professor of mathematics to understand this mound configuration. You just need to understand Pythagoras' theorem.
Well, I'm not even on that page.
It's a very simple theorem about a right triangle.
Okay, so
you probably did it at school, and
protractors at the ready, everyone. Well, now the people that were basically going back to NASA and said, "Look, you got to look at this more seriously." I think Brian O'Leary was one of those people, wasn't he?
Indeed, I knew Brian well. He was also a member of SPSR until his untimely passing away in South American country. He was adamant that the face on Mars was an indication, almost like a calling card, for us to go to visit Cydonia. And he did a lot of research into UFOs as well, as you probably are aware.
Yeah. Now, wasn't one of the other people that was, you mentioned names and I can't remember them, but some of them are dead as well? I mean, isn't that a little bit suspicious?
No, we're all going to die one day. And as you grow older, you know, our cells begin to wear down and we are subject to all kinds of illnesses. Professor Horace Crater died in 2017.
What a name. Classic name for the type of investigations he did.
Yes,
it is, really.
Yes. I think he's had many a joke thrown at him about craters on Mars. But he took it all in good humor. He was a great guy. He came to England in, I think it's 2014, to speak at the British Interplanetary Society, where I was also invited to present a paper. And I got some great photos of Professor Crater in London. Yes. So I think his name will be remembered by history when people think back to this configuration of mounds and say that was the first scientist who was open-minded enough to do the full analysis of this configuration of mounds.
And they went back to NASA and said, "You've got to, put your space probes over this a little bit more." Yes. What was NASA's reply?
At the time, this was in the 90s, when there was a great hue and cry going on because Richard Hoagland had written a book called The Monuments of Mars, and he had almost become a persona non grata at NASA, and they were not happy with him and the claims he was making. So it was a very touchy time, testy time, but they listened carefully to the Society for Planetary Safety Research because, as I said, that society was founded by Professor Stanley McDaniel, who was a professor of philosophy at Sonoma State University. And all the scientists who went to do their presentations included Vince DiPietro, who found the second photo of the face on Mars that had been misfiled by NASA mysteriously.
Oh, there's a surprise.
Yeah. Now, the second photo, is that the same as the first? Because I have seen another picture when they said they photographed it at a different time of day, and it's not really a face; it's just a mountain with a few shadows. So
they're still claiming that.
Yeah,
they still claim that despite the high resolution pictures that we have, and it was only a couple of years ago. Well, actually, 2017, 2018. That the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter rephotographed the face. And what I see there is a face. It's undeniably a face with more detail. There's more detail within the eye area. There's more detail within the mouth area, like the hint of teeth.
Wow.
So it has deepened the mystery rather than explained the mystery away. Wow. But most people are not aware of that because most people are not studying the photos taken by the MRO.
So this picture, the more recent picture, people can go to a NASA website and type in Mars face and maybe find it or something?
Yes, they can, indeed.
Right,
if you go to the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter site, it's called HiRISE, based at the University of Arizona. You'll be able to look at all the pictures they've taken. There's been, I don't know, over 20, 30 photos of the face being taken since 1976 through the years.
And I just find it incredibly strange that NASA lands all these rovers on Mars, but they don't seem to want to land them where all the stuff's happening.
They haven't gone to Cydonia.
Yeah.
Cydonia would have been the first place I would have picked.
Yeah, they stick them at the edges of craters or at the bases of mountains and things like that. And they look around.
You know what they found? All these rovers, they found evidence of water flow.
Yeah.
So there's no doubt Mars had water, as we had been stating 20, 30 years ago.
They seem to announce it every 3 or 4 years on average, don't they? We found water on Mars. And it's like, well, you told us that 4 years ago. But there's been, I've seen on the Rich Planet TV show, which is on the internet, richplanet.net, for those who want to know more, where they've talked about Mars, and they think that there's like, I forget the terminology, these acrinoids or something, or something that looks like kind of worm type of creatures encrusted or fossilized within the Martian rock.
Yes. There was a report many years ago, but that was based on meteorites found on on Earth, which are believed to have come from Mars. But now the rovers have found evidence of what look like fossils on Mars. Yeah. So they're the subject of scientific papers. Now, it takes a long time to publish scientific papers because it's got to go through a peer review process, back and forth, and arguments about this could be something else. If it is, then you need to try and explain what that something else is before you put forward this theory. So it's all a question of putting forward a hypothesis and getting it knocked down. That is how science progresses. That is very slowly. So don't be surprised if it takes us another 50 years before NASA finally admits, oh yes, we did find life in the soil of Mars in 1976. Yes, we did find evidence of fossils on Mars. What's next?
Because there is evidence that when Viking did land on Mars in 1976, that the initial photographs they took showed it having a blue sky. And then later on, they tweaked their colours to say, oh, no, it's a slight mistake on the camera. It's actually got a pink sky. But they actually have a colour chart on the side of these landers where they're literally, like the test card you'd have on the BBC or any other TV station. And so you would calibrate your cameras to the white of the white bar so that all the other colors would then follow suit, and basically that's how you get your cameras to look at the right color. But in fact, if you look at the color white, because it shows it in one of the photos of the color chart that they aim the camera down on, it has a slight pink bias to it, which means they haven't done it the right color temperature.
That is correct. And we've been aware of this through the decades. It's only recently that NASA has admitted that sometimes, and they use the word sometimes carefully, the Martian sky is blue.
Ah, that's interesting. I haven't heard them talk about admitting to it being a blue sky.
They won't.
Yeah.
Except
didn't they say it was some kind of like color misalignment?
Yeah. It was this color calibration bar sequence. When like in the old days, before we had 24-hour TV, you on mostly BBC Two, you would get these color charts or test cards, as they put them on the TV screens.
Yeah.
And because I've got a background in TV broadcast, and I'm fully aware of these test cards and things like that.
Yes.
And you use oscilloscopes to line up what they call chroma, which is color, and you calibrate the white, and you calibrate the blacks, and everything should be correct from that. But what they didn't correctly do on their cameras, or either intentional, we're not quite sure, is that they should point the camera down at their color bar that they stuck onto the side of their Viking lander, and they should then calibrate, maybe again using an oscilloscope to get it correct, but they should calibrate the white, which they see on the white stripe of the color bars, which is printed on the side of their Viking lander, and calibrate the camera so it is white. And so when you then tilt the camera up, you'll see the view as it should be correctly portrayed.
From a transmission point of view.
Yeah.
So we're talking about even the cards you were talking about on BBC Two were calibrated for transmission.
Yeah.
Of course, the receiving end might not be calibrated properly, so might well see different colors anyway from the transmission.
Yeah, although when they line their TV monitors up at the other end at NASA, whoever makes the monitors, Sony or whoever, they calibrate their things before they release them from the factory. But of course, you can fiddle with the colors,
Indeed,
afterwards. You see.
And there were rumors that in some of the NASA sites, technicians went around moving these color controls on the screens so that the sky did look pink or red.
Was it called Building 5 that was supposed to be notorious for doing that kind of thing?
Yeah. Yes, it's all.
So Building 5 was where all the touch-ups and all the anomalies got blotted out.
Yeah. So since we came to discussing Mars, so I've mentioned Professor McDaniel's books, and I mentioned my book, and I thought my book has 4 parts to it, and the last 2 parts deal with the moon pictures and the Mars pictures. And the first part of the book is about the massive Vimana. The word Vimana is a Sanskrit word, which means aerial object or aerial chariot. It comes from the written history, some people say mythological history of India, but it's a Sanskrit word that has many meanings. One of them being a flying chariot. So this couple in Reading observed this massive object over the atomic weapons establishment in Boroughfield, Reading. And they observed it for 8.5 minutes. It's the most astounding thing because the sheer size meant it would have been spotted on the cameras around the site. It's, after all, a Ministry of Defense installation.
A very sensitive installation.
Very sensitive, extremely sensitive, because that's where all the research on atomic weapons is done, both for here and for the United States of America. So it's obviously subject to the Official Secrets Act. And my book explains what happened after this couple contacted me. And a very interesting story unfolds. So I'll leave it there because I don't want to spoil the surprises for the reader.
So have you, because of these investigations, have you been approached by anyone from the Ministry of Defence or related to those kind of agencies?
No.
No one. Would that be admitting things if they came and saw you, I suppose?
Because they know I speak. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's no Men in Black or anything like that, mysterious people turning up at your door and saying keep quiet or anything like that. Because
nothing like that has happened to me. I have been vocal about the subject of unidentified flying objects since 1964, since the day I changed my mind.
Yeah,
and I
absolutely.
started researching, reading books, talking to witnesses. I've been out in the field and talked to witnesses, asked them to describe what they've seen, get them to make sketches. One of the most important things that you ask a witness is how large did the object appear in the sky compared to the full moon? That's a very important question to ask. Because if people say, oh, it was as big as a golf ball or an orange or something like that, you need to know, you need some frame of reference, because that doesn't mean anything. If I saw light in the sky now, and I just did, it so happened that a plane that's just left Heathrow Airport turned its lights on and was coming towards me. So I'm so big light. I'm very familiar with these lights every evening. You think, oh, that light looked about the size of a grape, but that of course means nothing, because I don't know how far away that object was from me. So you need to know, in order to determine the size of an object in the sky, you need to know the distance and the angle it subtends to the eye. Now, a full moon subtends half a degree. So 2 full moons placed next to each other would subtend 1 degree. As you know, the circle is divided into 360 degrees. So 1 degree is quite small, but by coincidence, the sun also subtends half a degree in the sky, which is why we can have a total eclipse of the moon. Another one of these strange coincidences, the moon, apart from being showing us only one face towards Earth, also subtends the same angle as the sun. Interesting thought.
So when these witnesses see these things, do they have a clear memory of it? Because sometimes these people have missing time and things like that. I just wondered if a lot of these witnesses, have a vague idea of what they've seen and they can't quite remember it unless they go under hypnosis or something.
Most witnesses have conscious memory. Some have forgotten details. Many of them are completely puzzled by what they've seen. It's happened by surprise. They were not expecting to see this object in the sky. Even if they had cameras, they didn't think of getting the camera out to take a photo. And they can describe details. I'm talking now about structured craft, not lights in the night sky. There are, of course, reports of lights in the night sky that do interesting maneuvers. That is a different matter from seeing a stationary light or a slow-moving light where you can't see any detail. In my case, our sighting was in the morning, as I said, about 10 minutes before 9 a.m. And we could clearly see some detail on those objects. They were structured discs that were obviously aerial vehicles. And one has to say, at that time, I had no idea what they were. Although I'd said I didn't think they exist.
And since joining the Atherius Society, did you kind of get further information about those craft you saw as a schoolboy? Like, did they say, yes, they were definitely...
I did. And that's another astonishing thing. And I wasn't going to go into that, but the Atherius Society publishes a book about that particular day, which I wasn't aware of because I'd never heard of the Atherius Society in 1964. I came across it in 1966 when I was a student at Imperial College. So there was another astonishing thing about the book that they published about the 8th of July, 1964, believe it or not.
Wow.
So, yes, I learned a great deal more. However, all in all, I I want to say that I believe that flying saucers do exist, and I've not changed that conclusion since the day I saw the objects. I've done a great deal of research on this. I've studied a great deal, but that one encounter taught me more about these objects than most of the books that I've read. And there are books dime to a dozen, as you know, from Jim Mars to Major Donald Kehoe, Stephen Greer, and all the other researchers included. And I'm not detracting from any of that research. I think all research is valid, providing it's done carefully and providing it's documented carefully. We're now in the arena where papers are being published in scientific journals, like the Journal of Space Exploration, about the moon objects and the Mars mound configuration. So this is an interesting change in attitudes towards these, the mysteries of space. And I would love one day to sit down and have a chat with Brian Cox. If you can arrange that for me, that would be a wonder, because I'd be able to show him this.
Unfortunately, we don't know him personally, and I don't think he'd probably want anything to do with us. But we bring up his name quite often because he's the kind of the epitome of the mainstream kind of consciousness that's out there.
Yes,
mainstream, as in what most people believe, because what they've been told to believe by NASA and the government and mainstream sources, really.
He's the poster boy for astronomy and
exactly
space sciences,
exactly.
Isn't he?
Rock stars, they call them.
He's not even an astronomer, as far as I'm aware. Actually, he's
astrophysicist, I think.
Astrophysicist.
Which I don't know quite what the difference is, but he talks about the physics of planets, maybe, rather than just looking through a telescope. I don't know.
A very interesting man. Obviously, very knowledgeable, and I understand also plays in a pop group. Or
he used to be a keyboard player, I understand, in a 90s band. I've never actually tracked him down, but
D-Ream, I think it was called.
Yeah, we'll have to find some videos.
Which brings us to another popular musician who stopped his music in order to go into UFO research, Tom DeLonge.
Yes, yeah. No, I thought he was going to say the guy from the Trogs, but that was a few centuries before.
Don't forget Reg Presley as well. Yes.
Oh yeah, Reg Presley. Now, Robbie Williams is also interested.
He's got a house in LA, and he's got an observatory or a mini kind of telescope type thing, and often watches the LA skies looking for anomalies.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to mix with these people, wouldn't it? To be able to speak with them.
Yeah, I know John Lennon claimed he saw a UFO in New York.
He did.
Yeah.
So did Muhammad Ali, so did Elvis Presley, so did many other people.
Wow.
Even Ronald Reagan, I think, actually.
Yes, Ronald Reagan did, yes.
Yeah.
So moving on to UFO experiences, can you give us a few more stories of experiences you've had with the UFOs?
Well, since I've spoken a lot about myself, let me now talk about some other witnesses.
Sure.
Because I have been investigating this for many decades. I don't know if you knew that I appeared on a chat show, a morning chat show called Espresso.
No,
which went out some years ago. I think it was broadcast on Channel 5, ITV5. Was there an ITV5?
ITV +1 or ITV2, maybe one of these extra ITV channels, perhaps.
No, it had number 5 on it for some reason.
Anyway,
could have been Channel 5.
What was the crux of it?
Yeah. Anyway, that I did appear on this chat show, and they asked me about my UFO research, and in fact on that program I showed a portion of a video clip that a family in Hemel Hempstead had taken many years ago, which showed some objects. Well, there were some planes. It was a nighttime film, so obviously, if you take a video film at night, it's not very clear, number one. And if you see lights in the sky, that's all you're seeing. You're seeing lights. But there's one interesting part of the film where two lights move towards each other and then move away apart from each other. So clearly they were not airplanes, because you could see the airplanes with the flashing lights in the same film. So I showed this on the espresso. By the way, I think that the TV espresso show is somewhere on YouTube. So you might find it if you search for espresso, as in coffee, on YouTube.
Wade through the Maxwell House adverts and then we'll find you.
Then there are several other. Another couple. It's interesting that quite often couples see UFOs. And this particular couple who lived near in Buckingham, there's a place called Row in Buckingham. Oh, you're in Buckingham, aren't you?
We'll have to get them to the...
I'm in Buckinghamshire.
Yes.
So Buckingham is the capital town, if you like, of Buckinghamshire.
Yes. It's the place in Buckinghamshire where they saw this object one night. Well, they saw some light. They were driving back from a friend's. They had their little, I think it was a 4-year-old child in the back seat of the car, and they saw these lights coming through the hedge. So they stopped the car and went up to the hedge to look through it, and they could see an object in the field. So they drove further down to find the gap in the hedge, and they were astonished to see this massive circular object in the field, apparently landed or apparently on the field, or maybe it was a few inches above the field, because there were no markings next day when they went to look again. But this object was lit up and was shining a white beam out into the sky. And then they saw little, when I say little, smaller red objects darting about in the sky, not far from the object. So again, I got them to do a sketch for me, which they did. And they observed this for many minutes. But because they had the child in the car and they were a little bit concerned, they were not afraid because the object did nothing, no harm to them. But later when they got home, they thought they might have had some missing time. But I don't put people under hypnosis. That's not something I do because I prefer to have conscious memory experiences related to myself when I do my research. So that's another story that's in my files that's never been published anywhere. I had some reports published. Remember the UFO magazine that Graham Birdsall used to publish?
Yeah, the 90s magazine, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I did several presentations at his conferences decades ago, and we talked about the subject many a time. Obviously, he was very interested. Otherwise, he wouldn't have founded that very successful magazine until his demise.
It's interesting your mention about the UFO in Buckingham sort of almost landed. Yes. It reminds me very much of a story that was related to me by a lady called Carol Cochran. I don't know if you're familiar with that name or not, but she's actually a researcher into crop circles. She's originally from Scotland, but she now lives in London with her husband. And she came into the talk for my High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup group a couple of years ago. And she said that she even remembers the year. It was 1971, and she was coming on a train from Scotland to head down to the south because she was going to go to the Isle of Wight festival to see Jimi Hendrix. And she said that she was meeting up with a friend of hers at one of the stations further south of Scotland. I think it might have been Doncaster, possibly. Yes. And they were somewhere between Doncaster and another area. I forget the area now. But she said the train, they were sitting next to the window and the train slowed right down and they suddenly heard, and this is 1971 before you had like announcements over speakers and things like that. They suddenly heard the train whistle toot quite loudly for a long time. So it was obviously trying to alert people in the carriages that something was up, and the train slowed down to an almost walking pace. Yes. And they could, she said, her and her friend could see everybody in all the other carriages walk to one side of the carriages and look out the window, which they were the window of. And so they thought, well, whatever they're looking at, we're going to see in a second. And as they went around this slight curve of the track, they looked down the bank, which they thought was about 50 feet down, and down the bank was a silver landed flying saucer. And they could even see a ladder of some sort coming from it. They saw no beings, no one around, but they saw it for about 5 or 6 seconds as the train slowly went around. And that's obviously what the driver had seen. He was trying to slow down so that everyone could get a look at it.
Could look at it.
Yeah, I mean, so roughly the date and the time. It's the Isle of Wight Festival. I can't remember the dates of that, but it could be looked up. Maybe a day before.
Wonder if people had any cameras with
Well,
them?
this is what I've wondered. Like if she was going to the Isle of Wight Festival, maybe she would have had a Kodak Brownie or something, but she never said she did, but it would have been great. What she actually wondered if maybe, she's trying to think it rationally. Was it maybe a film set for Doctor Who or something like that, you see? So she tried to, go on the skeptical side of things. Yeah. But she said she saw no reports of anything or being filmed in the area, nothing like that. But there was probably no reports of it being landed because maybe it was there for a few seconds. But it'd be interesting to find other witnesses that were on that train that day that looked over the side of the bank along with Carol and her friend and saw the same thing. An amazing thing.
This is the sort of report that would have come out in Flying Saucer Review if people had reported it. And do you know if they saw the object take off or was it landed
I
all
understand
the
it
time?
Just landed all the time, and the train went round the bank and then carried on. And after that, they never saw it. And there was no.
What was the name again? Carol
Cochrane. I can send you a link to the video. I filmed her do an interview the evening that she did her presentation. Prior to the presentation, I filmed a quick 20-minute interview, and she talked about this story, so you can hear it from her own lips, and I'll send you the link to it after the recording, and you can have a listen to it. She talks about it right at the very end, but most of the interview she's talking about her method for decoding crop circles using the place names of where the crop circles appear in. So for instance, Alton Barnes is a typical place, a crop circle, and she would take those letters, and I can't remember her method, but she takes certain letters from the name place of the town and maybe the village or the county and puts together a message that it weaves like I forget, there's a terminology for this kind of thing, but it's a very interesting method she's got. Whether it scientifically works or not, I can't say, but it's very interesting.
I remember her talking about this, actually. I can't remember if it was an interview that she did with us or whether it was one of your talks, Neil.
It was probably the talk. You probably came to her.
Yeah.
She might be very interested in the mound configuration on Mars.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sure she would be. I'm sure she would. I can put you in contact with her because she's on Facebook. I've got her email address somewhere and things like that. So... and she does have her own website, the Sirius Letters, for anyone that's interested. Sirius, the Sirius Letters.
As in the star?
Yep, Sirius Letters, yeah. I don't know if it's a .com or .co.uk, but if you just type Carol, the Sirius Letters, you'll find her website. But I'll certainly send you a video so that you can have a look at that, and where she talks about this landed UFO on the way down to the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
Right, great. And one other sighting I'll talk about. Again, this is a lady. She's out walking a dog, and this is near Amersham.
Oh, that's literally up the road from me.
She's out walking the dog, and she's the road she's on is slightly downhill, and there are houses on the left and gaps between the houses. And she realized that as she's walking down, she's seeing something going past the houses. So she carried on walking. And when she got to the bottom of that little bit of hill, there was the object stopped waiting in the sky, waiting apparently for her, because she had been unwell. And she said after this sighting, she was healed. Ooh. So she drew a picture of the object, and it was a classic flying saucer. Now I cannot remember the exact date. It's in her letter to me in my files. I have many files with unpublished reports, and I have published some. By the way, I've even had 1 or 2 reports published in the old Flying Saucer Review, going back a few decades. So this lady walking her dog saw the object. She stood in front of the object, observing this beautiful, what she described was a beautiful circular shape object, and she was absolutely convinced that this object had sent some kind of a healing ray or beam to her, and that's why she became well on that day. And the only other witness, unfortunately, was the dog, which obviously we couldn't help. Yeah. Just another interesting story, because before you wind up, I thought I'll mention one or two of the reports I have investigated. Of course, there are sighting reports, and then there's sighting reports with evidence. And the most interesting ones are the radar visual ones, which we started off by describing the USS Nimitz, which were clearly radar visual and pictures taken by forward-looking infrared cameras. So they were pretty convincing evidence of a 40-foot object which looked like a tic-tac and doing absurd maneuvers just over the ocean. And it had dropped down to the ocean from height of 80,000 feet or something like that in a very short space of time. And then it shot off at an amazing speed. And if you have heard the pilot, a man by the name of Fravor, speak about this on television, he's absolutely amazed. He said, that thing flew so fast, it can't have been our technology. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is a Scientific Coalition of Ufology, SCU. They managed to obtain a copy of this tape and analyzed the speed at which this object left the sea from a standing position to an almost instantaneous acceleration. Now, I'm going to allow you to guess, on the assumption that you haven't seen this report before, to guess what speed this object accelerated off.
Okay.
What acceleration it took off at.
I might have a subconscious memory of it, but I'll tell you one thing, that you mentioned 80,000 feet as where it descended from, but I did see one of these radar operators of the Nimitz say, it says 80,000 feet, but he said that's the limit of what our radars will go to, so they think it's come down from a lot higher. But 80,000 feet is where they pick it up from, and it starts to register on their scopes. I would take a guess, based upon other UFO sightings, leaving the water maybe at 5,000 miles an hour. I don't know why that figure comes to me, but maybe it's
any
less,
other guesses?
Andy?
I'm going to say 10,000. I'm going to say 10,000 miles per hour, just to kind of like
double it.
I'm glad you made bold suggestions. I mean, both of your suggestions are fairly high speed and quite bold suggestions. I'm glad you did that, because the actual value was in excess of 200,000 miles per hour.
Right.
Do you think we have such technology?
No.
Wow.
Well, unless, of course, you go with the whole kind of secret society, kind of Elysium style humans who are completely detached from the normal human race, who have their far advanced technology.
And live in space, do they?
Or deep in the earth. We never know.
Or under the water.
Well, this is it. I mean, you know, underwater bases and what do they call it? Underwater. What's the underwater version?
USO.
Of
UAV.
UAV.
USO.
USO.
USOs are a thing. So yeah.
Unidentified
submerged
objects.
Yeah. There's been quite a few of those observed over the years, hasn't there? It's we spoke to the Birmingham UFO Group's Dave Hodrin about this, and we spoke about the Shag Harbour incident off the coast of Canada in 1967 or 68.
I remember that incident very well. Yes.
And they tracked it for a number of days. It just wasn't over one day. They tracked it for a few days going down the coast of Canada, I believe. Or something.
Yes.
So, and it left.
They couldn't do a thing about it, could
Yeah, it was a luminous green something they left in the water or something, like an emission of some sort, a luminous trail or something that they noticed in the water. Yeah. But yeah, so 200,000 miles. And how do they work that out? They film it coming out of the water and calculate objects seen, or?
Yes, it's. I wish I could give the report to you, but I can't. I'll check the report again and send you an email as to how they actually did the calculation.
Yeah,
it's based on the film. Based on the film.
On the film footage of it coming out of the water. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it was hovering over the water to begin with, when the two F-18s flew towards it, because the radar operators told them to go and see what this object was that they were painting on their radar.
And so, didn't that last like all day or something? It wasn't just a quick one-off thing. These things were in the air for 12 hours or something.
It lasted several days. According to several of the witnesses on the ships.
Right. Yeah. So they almost put a display on for the U.S. Navy.
Or they were monitoring what the U.S. Navy were doing.
Yeah, but they weren't being secretive about it. They weren't like hiding in the clouds or anything, were they?
Not on that occasion, no.
No.
Think about it. A very advanced race that has spacecraft capable of operating in our atmosphere must have two buttons, or maybe more. One button would say invisible to the naked eye. The other one would say invisible to terrestrial radar.
And the fact that the United States government have released this information to us, what does that say?
It says they're testing the water. They want to see whether people are going to panic, and whether Wall Street is going to collapse, that they've implied that there's possibility of unidentified flying objects operating in our atmosphere. The embarrassment for any nation, especially the most powerful nation militarily speaking, is to admit that there's something greater than them.
Yeah.
Violating our airspace.
And obviously with the Disclosure Project and other things similar to that, that more people, especially with the advent of the internet, are becoming aware of these things.
Yes.
And so we are being conditioned or slowly drip fed or soaked to this idea of something out there, whatever that something may be. And so with the US now coming on board and basically saying, yes, we've got the Academy to the stars, or we're investigating this, that, and the other, and now here's the NIMS. There's like major, every 6 months now, we're getting major bits of UFO information coming out that they've had on their files. It's interesting.
As I said, they're sort of testing the water. You test the water before you want to see.
Soft disclosure kind of thing.
It is very soft, and it's taken a long time. I mean, I remember in the 60s, I started looking at that Project Blue Book reports, and the U.S. Air Force would twice a year come out saying, these things don't exist, but they are not a security threat.
Now, obviously, your book talks about these UFOs hovering near atomic establishments and things like that. Would that be a security threat, or would they just? You would say they're trying to maybe have a good intention to us by trying to stop us using that kind of energy, I presume.
Well, we don't know fully why they monitor places like atomic weapons establishments. Obviously, these buildings are subject to the Official Secrets Act. They're Ministry of Defense sites. They're highly sensitive, and people who know can't talk about what may have been seen. So all I can say is my attempt to find out more from the AWE itself was not successful until my MP got involved.
Right.
So there's another interesting thing to read about in the book.
Okay. And what's the book called again?
Massive Vimana over the atomic weapons establishment. The word Vimana is spelled Vimana.
By Ananda Sirisena. And so if people want to contact you, Ananda, how can they do that?
My email address is in the book.
Okay. But if someone doesn't want to buy the book at the minute, but they want to email you saying, would you like to come to our UFO group, or can you do an interview? How can they still contact you? Is there a general website they can get hold of you?
Email me in the first instance.
Yep.
And that same email address appears on the SPSR website, which I haven't given you yet.
Okay.
It's http.
Yep.
//
Yep.
spsr.utsi.edu.
Right. Okay. So that's the website to track you down on and look for further information and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, well, you can take my email address. It's very simple. It's Ananda, LS, at AOL.com.
Brilliant. Okay. Brilliant. Well, thank you very, very much indeed for coming on the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. It's been a fascinating couple of hours discussing all things UFOs and faces on Mars and things like that. It's an amazing. This can go on for hours, really, where this subject goes to.
It could. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. And any last words, Andy?
No, it's just been very interesting. I would have liked to have heard more personal UFO accounts and maybe alien accounts, but maybe that could be for another show another time.
Show, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, I know that Ananda is going to come and do a talk at High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup Group, so that might be an opportunity to find out more. I forget when it is, Ananda. Can you remember? Myself, my memory is scant on these things.
We agreed on the last Monday in October, did we?
October, that sounds about right, yes.
Was it October or September?
I think it's October. You're right. So I will put details of that online when we're nearer to that point. Yes. And so if anyone wants to come and hear Ananda speak in person, he will be speaking at High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup Group on the last Monday of the month in October. And High Wycombe's in Buckinghamshire, and he'll be talking at the Bricklayers Arms, which is a pub in Downley in the High Street in High Wycombe, Buckinghamshire. And if you join the Facebook group High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup Group, you'll be able to find details of other talks as well as Ananda's. And also, if you want to join the Facebook group, the Paranormal Peep Show, you'll be kept abreast of other talks we're doing, other interviews, and also I'll try and post details there about upcoming talks for the High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup Group as well. So anyway, we'll come to the end of the show, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. And we'd just like to say thank you very much indeed for our audience listening to us. We do hope you find the shows of interest. If you have any questions, please message us on the Facebook group, the Paranormal Peep Show. And until next time, have a safe and pleasant summer. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.